Christmas in my Montana town usually arrives with a calm that settles over everything. That same calm made the moment I learned the truth feel even more devastating. My name is Simone. That evening, I was sitting on the floor of my parents' small house, wrapping the gifts I had spent the entire month saving for, trying to believe the holiday season might still carry a little warmth for me. I opened the windows slightly to let the room breathe as I folded the last sheet of wrapping paper. Before I could process anything, voices drifted up from the front yard as a car pulled in. It took only a heartbeat for me to recognize that tone, the sharp tone that always appeared whenever the subject was me. My hands went still when my sister's words shot straight through the cold air. "I don't want to spend Christmas with that useless loser." The sentence landed so heavily that even the wrapping paper seemed to weigh more. Moments later, my father's voice followed, tired and resigned, as if he had repeated the same line far too many times. "Just tolerate him a little longer until he finishes paying for the house renovation." I froze. 4 months, I had been paying for the repairs because I was told the house needed urgent work before winter arrived. Hearing the truth spoken with such ease made my chest burn and then turn cold within seconds. I gently closed the window so the paper would not scatter and sat there long enough to feel every word settle into place. And then Christmas came. The house still was not repaired. Creditors showed up at the door. And at that moment, the person they always called useless was gone. Before those words ever reached my window, everything had begun quietly at the start of winter. Montana can turn unforgiving as soon as the temperature drops, and the first sign of snow usually means families hurry to prepare their homes. That year, Mom called me one evening, her voice carrying worry. I did not question her. She said the electrical system in the house had been flickering for days and feared the cold would make the situation worse. The way she described it made it sound urgent enough that I did not hesitate to ask what needed to be done. Mom told me the company warned her that faulty wiring could cause outages during heavy storms, which would be dangerous for her and Dad. She said the house needed repairs quickly because the system was old and the cost would be more than she expected. I remember asking why the issue had not been dealt with earlier, and she said life had been difficult, so they postponed it until they could no longer ignore it. She rarely asked me for anything directly, which made the request feel serious. I told myself helping them was the right thing to do. While winter approached, the first payment I sent covered an inspection Mom insisted was necessary before the repair. I transferred the money and tried not to think too much about the strain it placed on my budget. My sister Barrett knew about the issue because Mom had told her as well. Yet, she never offered to contribute, and Mom defended her immediately whenever I hinted that the responsibility should not fall entirely on me. She would say Barrett had her own struggles or that she was already doing more than enough in ways that were not visible to me. I wanted to believe it, although I never saw any evidence supporting those claims. More requests arrived as the weeks passed. Mom said the electrician found additional issues that needed immediate attention, and each time she contacted me, the urgency in her voice grew. I had been trying to save for my own expenses, but every call chipped away at the small safety net I was building. I kept sending the money because she always reminded me that the house was still my childhood home and that she and Dad were doing their best. Dad barely spoke to me during this period. I assumed he was letting Mom handle everything because she had always been the one who managed household matters. The more I transferred, the tighter things became for me. I cut back on eating out and canceled several plans with friends, telling them I was trying to be responsible with my finances. Only one friend, Jod, knew I had been supporting my parents extensively. She told me to be careful, but I brushed it off, saying family needed to step up when things became difficult. I convinced myself the discomfort I felt was temporary, and that the repairs would be finished soon. It never crossed my mind that the situation might not be what I believed. By the time winter settled deeply over the town, I had already sent several payments and tried to stay optimistic. I told myself the stress was worth it because my parents would finally have a safe home for the season. I pictured the house warm and steady, with Mom no longer sounding anxious whenever she spoke to me. That image kept me moving forward, even as I watched my bank account shrink to a level that made me nervous. The morning after that conversation arrived with a weight I could feel before opening my eyes. I woke with the awareness that every assumption I once relied on might no longer hold, and that whatever I chose to do next needed to come from clarity rather than fear. I took a slow breath before sitting up, sensing that rushing into the day would only make the thoughts from last night press harder against me. I made a cup of tea and opened my banking app, following the long trail of transfers that stretched back through the previous months. Each payment carried the same simple memo about repairs. Yet, the repetition created a pressure behind my ribs that I could not ignore. I enlarged a few old receipts and wrote down each date to review them thoroughly. As I compared the information, I noticed inconsistencies that caused my pulse to rise despite my efforts to stay calm. While I was still examining the records, Mom answered a call in the living room. Her tone carried an urgency she rarely showed, and something about that shift made me pause. I stayed behind the half-closed door and placed my phone on audio record because I needed to understand exactly what had been happening instead of relying on fragmented guesses. Mom spoke about renovation updates, but the conversation did not resemble what she had been telling me for weeks. She mentioned delays that contradicted the invoices I held and referred to amounts that had never appeared in my transfers. I listened carefully as she discussed an electrician whose name had never once shown up on any bill. She referred to an additional payment she claimed would cover winter protection, yet I already knew that part of the house had been inspected and cleared months earlier. The call lasted long enough for me to gather several details that deepened my suspicion. When she finally hung up, I replayed the recording with headphones to ensure I caught every word accurately. I returned to the kitchen table and created a list of each discrepancy. The more I wrote, the more I understood that none of this could be dismissed as misunderstanding. I felt a mix of betrayal and disappointment settle inside me because I had believed in the urgency Mom described. I remembered the nights she told me that the house could lose power at any moment if repairs were not handled immediately. Yet, the invoices suggested that only minor checks had been completed. The largest payment I had made had not been used for electrical work at all, which left me staring at my notes in disbelief. Despite everything, I chose not to confront anyone yet. I needed more than fragments and contradictions. I reviewed the messages Mom had sent about scheduling repairs and compared them to the timestamps on her recorded call. The gaps were substantial enough to suggest that she had been repeating the same narrative to maintain control over the situation. I closed my notebook and tried to study my thoughts because I sensed that the truth was only beginning to surface. I spent the rest of the morning gathering every receipt I could find, including a few archived emails I had nearly forgotten about. Each document added another layer to the picture forming in front of me. I realized that I had been financing far more than what had ever been disclosed. My savings had diminished rapidly, yet neither Mom nor Barrett had offered to contribute despite knowing how much strain I was under. Even Dad had avoided discussing the repairs directly, which now felt intentional. By early afternoon, I understood that the only way to navigate what was unfolding was to continue documenting every inconsistency quietly. I closed my laptop and allowed a moment for the weight of the morning to settle because I knew that once I began following the evidence fully, there would be no turning back. A week later, I walked into the local office of the electric company with a determination heavier than the cold air outside. A clerk directed me to a technician, and that was when I met Leonard, the staff electrician who had handled most service calls in our neighborhood. I introduced myself and explained that I needed to verify a series of payments connected to my parents' house. Leonard studied the dates I provided, then opened his records with a thoughtful seriousness that made me feel both nervous and strangely validated. He scrolled through several screens before pressing his lips together with quiet hesitation. The first thing he told me was that no major electrical repairs had been scheduled during the months I had been transferring money. His voice held a careful tone as he explained that the only documented work involved a minor inspection and a panel reset, which cost significantly less than what I had been told. My stomach tightened when he said Mom had rescheduled 2 appointments but had never completed the larger repairs she claimed were urgent. I asked him to check again, hoping I had misunderstood something, yet he confirmed the information with the same steady manner. Leonard printed a detailed service summary and lowered his voice as he pointed to the payment section. The account listed for scheduled repairs had no record of any advance deposits. I remembered the messages Mom sent about paying in increments and stared at the paper long enough for the numbers to blur. He mentioned that if any third party had been paid, it had not gone through the company. That quiet remark told me more than he probably realized. I thanked Leonard for his time and stepped outside, opening my banking app before the door had even closed. I reviewed the transfers once more and compared them with the service summary in my hand. The discrepancy was undeniable. It felt surreal to stand in the parking lot and realize that the urgency I had responded to for months had never existed. At home, I examined the receipts Mom had forwarded over the past seasons. Several were legitimate, but others did not match any work Leo showed me. The inconsistency stretched further when I noticed some receipts were cropped screenshots without verification codes. I searched through earlier bank statements, revealing multiple transactions to stores Mom frequented, including beauty boutiques and a loan service she had mentioned once in passing. The pattern formed with a clarity that made my chest feel tight. I created a folder labeled for documentation and organized every piece of evidence I had gathered. The more I sorted, the clearer my next step became. I logged into the joint maintenance account and reviewed the balances that had shrunk rapidly throughout the year. For the first time, I noticed notifications I had dismissed earlier because I trusted the explanations given to me. Each alert now seemed like a warning I should have questioned. I transferred the remaining funds to my personal account and removed my access from the shared financial platform. I took screenshots of the transaction history and saved every message referencing repairs which I knew I would need later. I kept my actions quiet because tension was growing inside me in a way that demanded careful planning rather than immediate confrontation. When I finally closed my laptop, the realization settled that I was no longer contributing to anything uncertain. I would not fund another fabricated emergency, nor would I continue supporting decisions I had been excluded from. I sat still long enough to let that clarity replace the confusion that had followed me for weeks, because the truth had reached a point where silence carried more power than any conversation I could start. That afternoon, my phone vibrated nonstop, and I knew the quiet hours I had tried to carve out for myself were over the moment I saw Mom's name flashing across the screen. I let the first few calls ring out because I needed a moment to steady my thoughts. Yet she kept calling with rapid insistence, clearly aware that something had shifted on her end. When the ringing finally stopped, a text appeared with the same urgency that had pulsed through every call. Mom wrote that she had just received a notice from the electric company about an additional penalty fee attached to the overdue balance. Her message was disjointed, full of attempts to create sympathy. Although I sensed more fear than frustration, she insisted something must have gone wrong with the automatic payments, claiming she never missed a deadline. I read her messages twice to make sure I was not imagining how quickly she had moved from confidence to panic. I could almost picture her pacing while trying to decide what explanation might convince me to step back into the role she expected. Before I could respond, another call came through. Barrett's voice cut through the line the instant I answered, brimming with irritation. She demanded to know what I had done, claiming Mom was overwhelmed and that the household was falling apart because of my actions. I held the phone to my ear and let her anger spill out until she reached the accusation she had clearly rehearsed. "You just want to ruin everything, don't you?" Her words no longer surprised me, but the speed with which she hurled them made me pause. I waited for a moment to respond with clarity rather than emotion. "Ask Mom what she said last night," I said. There was sudden silence across the line, and I could hear the uncertainty in Barrett's voice. She muttered that she had no idea what I was talking about, though her tone carried an unsteady note that betrayed her confusion. Before she could regain her footing, I ended the conversation without waiting for her reply. Mom resumed calling within seconds. Her tone shifted immediately when I picked up. She tried to sound wounded as she explained that the penalty fee would create a larger problem if it remained unpaid. She reminded me of how much stress she had been under and emphasized the danger of letting the balance escalate while temperatures continued to drop. Her approach blended guilt, fear, and convenience in a way that felt familiar. Yet this time I listened with distance that surprised even me. When I told her I no longer had access to the joint account she had relied on for household expenses, her voice rose in disbelief. She insisted that I must have misunderstood something and urged me to transfer a temporary amount to buy her time. I answered calmly because I wanted her to hear the resolve shaping every word. I could not continue supporting a system that operated on secrecy and selective truth. She tried to interrupt me several times, yet I continued speaking until her resistance turned into a quiet plea. I ended the call when she realized I would not shift my position and set my phone aside to regain the mental clarity disrupted by the back and forth. 3 days later, Mom appeared at my doorstep without warning. Her stiff shoulders told me she had prepared a story long before she knocked. I opened the door to hear whatever explanation she believed would shift the blame away from her choices. I kept my phone recording from the moment she walked inside. She stepped past me and looked around as if searching for a version of me that might be softer or more forgiving, although my silence seemed to unsettle her more than raised voices ever could. Mom began speaking rapidly, claiming the situation with the electric company had been exaggerated and that the billing problem had resulted from a clerical error. She described the penalty fees as unnecessary complications and insisted she had been handling everything responsibly. Her tone rose with each sentence, yet she avoided mentioning the conversation she had with Barrett in the driveway. I listened with calm restraint, and she shifted between frustration and sweetness, hoping a change in approach might create sympathy. When she paused, I finally spoke. "Mom," I said. The color in her face changed almost instantly, and she struggled to understand how much I had actually heard. She tried to deny it, insisting she had never said anything unkind about me, that she would never manipulate my willingness to help. Yet the panic in her eyes made it clear she knew denial was the weakest strategy. I let her continue for another minute to capture every contradiction. Then I played the audio clip of her conversation with Barrett. The room turned heavy with a silence only truth could create. Mom's expression tightened as she listened to her own voice instructing Barrett to tolerate me until I finished paying for the renovation. She tried to claim the recording was taken out of context, yet even she could hear how hollow that defense sounded. I watched her struggle to rebuild the narrative she had relied on for months, while the facts sat between us with undeniable clarity. Before she could speak again, my phone lit up with Barrett calling. I answered on speaker because I had no intention of shielding anyone from the truth. Barrett sounded irritable from the start, but the tension in her voice cracked when she realized Mom was standing in my home. She accused me of creating chaos and claimed Mom had been under unbearable pressure. Her frustration returned to the same line she had favored. "You just want to ruin everything, don't you?" Her words no longer held weight. I told Barrett what I had said earlier. "Ask Mom what she said last night." Mom inhaled sharply, and Barrett hesitated long enough for me to understand she recognized my refusal to accept their version of events. When I hung up, Mom tried to appeal for sympathy again, insisting the timing was unfortunate and the stress of the season had created misunderstandings. I stood near the doorway and calmly told her I would no longer contribute any money to the household, and that the decisions she made with the funds were her responsibility alone. My tone remained even because I no longer needed volume to express the boundary I had chosen. Mom realized I had stepped back from the cycle she created. When she finally left, the air in the room settled with a quietness that felt unfamiliar but necessary. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of their expectations lifting. Christmas night arrived, and I drove toward my Aunt Marcy's house after finishing my shift at the clinic. Snow drifted across the road, and the glow from porch lights softened the landscape. The serenity lasted only in my mind, as my phone began vibrating with missed calls, but I let it ring. At my aunt's, her warm hug grounded me. She ushered me inside, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the tension lift. That Christmas marked the beginning of a new boundary, one that would not bend under guilt or manipulation. 1 week later, I realized I finally felt lighter. My apartment felt warmer, even though nothing had changed except my decision to protect my peace. Mom and Barrett were now responsible for every overdue notice and penalty. I received several long messages describing the inconvenience they were facing, but I stopped reading them once I understood they were attempts to redirect accountability. The silence that followed created an unexpected calm. I no longer carried hidden fear or tension. My days became mine again. I returned to small habits I once loved. Cooking slowly while listening to music, walking through my neighborhood without rushing. Life felt comfortable when no one was draining my emotional or financial energy. There was no reconciliation, no attempt to mend something that had already taken too much. My decision was firm because the truth had shown me how fragile my boundaries had been and how much strength it took to rebuild them. Peace does not arrive by accident but by choice. Generosity loses meaning when it becomes an expectation rather than a gift. Accountability cannot be borrowed, and trust cannot survive when honesty disappears. The moment I decided to stop paying for consequences that were never mine, I began to understand the value of emotional independence and the importance of protecting the space where my confidence grows.